Hello everybody, Secular Spirit here, and in this video I'm going to talk about an ex-Muslim that I haven't addressed much on this channel, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Born in Somalia, Hirsi Ali was subject to genital mutilation at the age of 5. As a teenager, adopted a strict form of Islam under the Muslim Brotherhood. She later moved to the Netherlands to escape a forced marriage, and after leaving Islam, she wrote a short film criticizing Islam's treatment of women called Submission. The short film attracted considerable controversy and led to death threats. And even worse, in 2004, the film's director, Theo van Gogh, was brutally murdered by a Muslim in broad daylight on an Amsterdam street. On Van Gogh's body, the Muslim left a note of warning to Hirsi Ali, who then went into hiding for several months. Hirsi Ali was the first prominent ex-Muslim I found out about when I left Islam, and I admired her bravery in publicly criticizing the religion, particularly because ex-Muslim women tend to receive the most vicious abuse from Muslims. I was also generally aware that she was aligned with right-wing politics in the Netherlands, including with some politicians who I'd say have exhibited a xenophobia that goes far beyond any legitimate concerns about Islam's treatment of women. Recently, she kind of fell off my radar. But last November, Hirsi Ali shockingly announced she was no longer an atheist. In an essay titled "Why I Am Now a Christian," which I've linked in the video description below, she explains the issues she had with Islam and what she felt were weaknesses in atheism. I'll get to those shortly, but I also noticed there was one glaring omission which you'd think would be the focus given the title: how she knows Christianity is true.
I'm not the Messiah. Will you please listen? I am not the Messiah. Do you understand? Honestly!
Only the true Messiah denies his divinity.
What?
I found that omission a fascinating insight in how faith can operate in many people, former atheists or lifelong believers alike. But okay, if she doesn't mention how she determined Christianity to be true, what does she say? Well, Hirsi Ali first delves into her Muslim upbringing. She was taught that worldly pleasures like reading novels, dancing, listening to music would lead her to the path of eternal hell. She learned to shun non-believers, to wear the burqa, to hate Jewish people. Later on in life, when she learned of the argument of renowned atheist Bertrand Russell, religion is based primarily on fear, that resonated with her. As an atheist, she realized she could discard her fear of everlasting punishment in hell. By comparison, she found simply rotting after death to be a relief. Now the big question, what changed? She starts by talking about the threats to Western civilization that she's perceived in the past 2 decades. China, Russia, global Islamism, woke ideology, and how secular tools are all failing to address those threats. The problem in her view is that Western civilization lacks something to unite it. For her, the atheist response of God is dead is an insufficient unifier, and there isn't enough solace in the, quote, rules-based liberal international order. She then concludes that the only credible answer, the only one, is upholding the legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition. She concedes that Bertrand Russell made some legitimate points about contradictions in Christian doctrine, but in what is an early sign that Hirsi Ali is indeed now a Christian, she avoids sharing what those issues with Christian doctrine are or how she reconciles them as a Christian, and instead, she follows the tried and tested Christian apologist method of deflecting by criticizing Islam instead and showing how she thinks Christianity is better. She notes that Russell disregarded how unique it is that he could make his critique in the first place in a Christian country. She writes, "Could a Muslim philosopher stand before any audience in a Muslim country and deliver a lecture of the title, 'Why I Am Not a Muslim'?" Now, I do think this claim about Islam is very accurate, glaring deflection aside, but what makes the Judeo-Christian tradition the only credible approach to unite people in the West? She asserts that freedom of conscience and speech does not come naturally to man. I don't know what this claim means, because she then explains that freedom of conscience and speech were produced from centuries of debate within Jewish and Christian communities. Isn't that the domain of man and thus coming naturally to them? Is she implying that it could only have been divinely inspired? It's unclear. She then states that it was this debate within Jewish and Christian communities that advanced science and reason, diminished cruelty, and suppressed superstitions. What? That's some outrageous revisionist history. I'd say it was more the case that those things happened in spite of Judeo-Christian tradition. It wasn't that organized religion uniquely and comprehensively promoted those changes, but rather that they happened with lots of resistance from organized religion, which then adapted itself to incorporate them. There's obviously no denying the Judeo-Christian institutions have contributed to advancements we've made as a species, which I think could be chiefly credited to the power and money they've long possessed as opposed to their spiritual strength. But there's also no denying that organized religion has had a spotty record and dark past and present in the West. Consider how the transatlantic slave trade was justified by Christian slave owners through the Bible, or the Spanish Inquisition, which had its roots in Catholic dogma. Consider how 17th century Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza was infamously expelled by his community and by his own family for simply challenging commonly held notions of God. Consider Christianity's role in oppressing LGBTQ people that persists to this day. If that's not enough, how opposition to contraceptives causes incredible suffering from the AIDS crisis in Africa. If anything, religious leaders have often helped propagate superstitions and divinely justified cruelty, and actively endeavored to hold back science and disregard reason in cases where they challenge tradition and scripture. When Hirsi Ali says Christianity left its dogmatic stage, that's an oversimplification that gives it too much credit. It's more that other forces in society, secular ones, grew in power, and so Christianity had to shed lots of its outward dogmatism and tax-exempt greed for control. Perhaps it was the case that the developments of reason and science needed Judeo-Christian organized religion, but in order to outgrow it and cast it aside. But let's not gloss over the reality that Christianity is still very much dogmatic today. After all, if you don't accept Jesus, you are not saved, you are condemned. And you don't have to look very hard to discover that its negative impacts on Western civilization are still evident. Look at the rise of fundamentalist Christianity in the United States as one example, where constitutional abortion rights were reversed in 2022, a decision celebrated by conservative Christians nationwide. And yet, Hirsi Ali writes, it became increasingly clear that Christ's teaching implied a circumscribed role for religion as something separate from politics. Islam is brazenly more political in nature, but separating religion from politics is far from the consensus Christian view that Hirsi Ali makes it out to be. There are lots of Christians who want religion more involved in politics. In the United States, 22% of adults think religious organizations don't have enough political influence, according to a 2022 Pew survey. Beyond surveys, just think about it logically. If a person believes a religion is true and that God and his teachings are the foundation of their lives, is it really possible to keep their religion separate from politics? The answer is obviously no. So, okay, what we've got so far is a weak case for Judeo-Christian tradition being the bedrock of science and reason that the West can use to unite in its ultimate battle against the evil White Walkers of Islamism, Russia, China, and wokeness. Going back to the beginning of her essay, Hirsi Ali writes that for Burton Russell, there was no credible case for the existence of God. And as we've seen thus far, she still hasn't provided her credible case for the Christian God's existence. Hirsi Ali gets a little bit closer to making this case when she writes, I would not be truthful if I attributed my embrace of Christianity solely to the realization that atheism is too weak and divisive a doctrine to fortify us against our menacing foes. I have also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable, indeed, very nearly self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question. What is the meaning and purpose of life? This is where we come to the core of why she converted. You can maybe consider the previous explanations as rational justifications that come along with her irrational Christian faith, which is built on an illogical and absurd burden of expectation she's placed on atheism. For someone who was a prominent voice in the atheist movement for decades, and who understands atheism very well, this is probably her most bizarre take in the entire essay. Of course, atheism fails to answer the question of the meaning and purpose of life. Atheism is not a belief system. It's not a philosophy. It's a lack of belief. As I've said many times on this channel, atheism is not something that should replace religion in your life. It's a starting point. It's a clean slate that an atheist can then build on. Many atheists, for example, aren't just atheists. They're humanists who use that as their foundation for their values and worldview. The problem is not with atheism, but with her dissatisfaction with atheism's harsh but honest realities. In an hour-long interview where she addresses criticisms of her essay, I've left a link for that too, but it's behind a paywall. Her interviewer asks for more details about her personal journey to faith. She answers that she went through a crisis of depression, that she self-medicated with alcohol. She then talks about how she hated the God she was taught through Islam. And so her therapist asked her once, if you had the power to make your own God, what would you do? And what she says is that as I was going on, I thought, that is actually a description of Jesus Christ and Christianity at its best. And so instead of inventing yet another new God, I started diving into that story. She explains how the stories of Jesus Christ, throw the first stone, love thy neighbor, look after the poor, filled her spiritual hole, how they gave her this feeling that she's going somewhere, giving her standards to live by. Does she believe the stories are true? Does she believe the Christian God is real? During a Q&A at the end of her interview, she relates how her atheist friends asked her, well, have you got any evidence for God? And her response was this: I want to sidestep that question by saying, I believe they are stories and I choose to believe the story that there is a higher power. What that means, I'm still developing, I'm still learning as much as I can. But I choose to believe in that story because the legacy of that story is what we're living through. And it's a story I like because it's a story that says human life is worth living because it's in the image of God. So where does the truth lie in the story she likes, the story that spared her all that hard work of inventing her own God? It's something that she, a respected writer and intellectual, will, in her own words, sidestep. Truth almost seems irrelevant to her. But truth does matter, or should I say, believing as many true things and as few false things as possible matters. Because how can we have a solid foundation to our lives otherwise? She wants to fight Islamism by swaying the hearts and minds of Muslims to Christianity. But countering others' irrational faith with another irrational faith is not the answer. It's the problem that has shaped countless wars and caused immeasurable suffering. I understand where Hirsi Ali and those in her position are coming from. Believe me. When you leave a religion that has been the foundation of your life since childhood, you have to rebuild your life. You have to explore and discover where your values come from, what your purpose is. Hirsi Ali is now rebuilding her life with a religion that shares many of the same harmful aspects as Islam, like condoning slavery, and lest we forget, Christianity also shares the threat of hell that she overcame when she became an atheist. I wonder, does she fear hell again now? And does she now believe that her atheist friends that she respects are destined for hell because they don't accept Jesus as their savior? During her interview, she contrasts the treatment she received as an atheist from Muslims, who sometimes would hold signs saying to kill her, behead her, with the treatment she received from Christians who sent letters saying they'll pray for her, even though she was criticizing Christianity too at the time. Saying Christians are an improvement on Muslims is missing the point. I've witnessed this phenomenon amongst other ex-Muslim Christians, who claim that Christianity makes more sense to them. Christianity being more palatable than Islam doesn't make it truer than Islam, and it doesn't automatically make it true, period. Instead of turning to Christianity, Hirsi Ali should reattempt the step I took as an ex-Muslim atheist, and that many atheists have taken. Finding a meaning to life without needing to have faith in a God who is essentially a non-answer, and attempt to solve a mystery by appealing to an even greater mystery. What is the meaning of life? Just trust in God. Why do bad things happen? Just trust in God. Is there afterlife God promises real? Just trust in God. Hirsi Ali writes, the God hole, the void left by the retreat of the church, has merely been filled by a jumble of irrational, quasi-religious dogma. The result is a world where modern cults prey on the dislocated masses, offering them spurious reasons for being in action. This is half true. People are searching for meaning in self-harming places, in illusory remedies promised by entities exploiting them. But organized religion has long been part of this problem rather than a solution we've abandoned. In her interview, Hirsi Ali voices concerns that all individuals won't automatically unite around things like reason and tolerance once they become atheists. Of course they won't, but it's a process. And turning to organized religions like Christianity that operate by disregarding reason and that have intolerance built into them is only going to slow down that process. Looking at the systemic reasons why people are turning to modern cults, seeking explanations for why people are struggling to find meaning is what we should be doing. How much of it has to do with the capitalist order of society where materialism/consumerism are the dominant forces, where massive inequalities are the norm, where developing countries are exploited for their resources or destroyed in proxy wars between superpowers. We need solutions, but Hirsi Ali's labeling of the God hole is a misrepresentation. What we have is a meaning hole, and God is just something that we've been jamming in there from time immemorial. Hirsi Ali ultimately describes herself as a lapsed atheist, which is an honest self-assessment. Her words indicate she never fully turned a critical eye towards organized religion. I'm disappointed in this, but it shows the understandable realities of how many of us operate in the world. We seek hope and comfort, and in favor of answers that give us solace, we suspend our reason and embrace irrationality. Yes, Hirsi Ali is mostly right about the meaninglessness that atheism leaves us with when she says at the very end of her interview that according to atheism, we have no more value than mold. When she asks if that's the case, then what's the point? She's missing the point. I, for example, view life as inherently meaningless. We don't have an objective higher value than mold. But we value ourselves more than mold. Life's meaninglessness frees us to choose our own meaning and negotiate our meaning together as a species so we can choose our best answer to the question, what's the point? Life is still inherently meaningless for theists whether they like it or not. They just select a god and convince themselves that this god's religion provides the inherent meaning of life. But in the end, it's just a choice like any of our choices. Instead of using blind faith, instead of basing our choices on wishful thinking for stories we hope are true because they comfort us, or basing our choices on the best propaganda tool to tackle this great imagined civilizational war between the West and the rest, or as she borderline appears to frame it, between good and evil, we should rely on the tools that Bertrand Russell supported: reason, empathy, and truth, with the aim of improving the well-being of others. Despite what Hirsi Ali and other theists say, we don't need a god for that. We just need ourselves. I'm Secular Spirit, and as always, thank you for watching, and please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll be back with another video very soon.